For a while.
Well, I've graduated in 1995, yeah, so faithfully for many, many years. Used to go to my parents' house. It was funny, they would actually, when I moved, it took me a while to get it transferred down to my house.
So just give me a holler when you guys.
Sure.
All right, good deal, thanks.
All right.
I'll close that, because it usually
Like
doesn't.
that.
Sure.
All right. Yeah, I do. That's a ride. I think I've grown to appreciate it a lot more as I've gotten older, right? I wasn't
Yeah.
moving for pleasure, right after college. That was fool's errand.
Yeah, well, I know. Really, and we still get calls today. Like, I graduated in 1980 and it's still going to my parents.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It was so funny because I used to get it, and my parents would dutifully when they'd see me, because I went to the University of Washington. We lived in Wedgwood, and then very similar to the conversation you had earlier. We moved all the way to Ballard. We decided that was the big move. So my parents, I'd see them all the time, and they'd bring down, the Columns magazine. I finally was like, I think I can probably notify them and just send them to my house.
So anyway, that's me.
Thanks for taking the time today.
Oh, my pleasure. I was very excited.
No, I'm excited about just seeing what we can, if there's something that's interesting conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So when Jerry was telling me about this, I'm thinking, okay, so Columns magazine comes out quarterly.
Yep.
Goes to 260,000 people.
Yep.
And circulation's growing all the time. And it's a general interest magazine.
Yep.
So I am always looking for a wide mix of pieces. I could do wall-to-wall medicine and engineering. I want everything. And when he told about, that, thinking, okay, how many people would know the depth of the UW connections in this industry, and like the applied physics lab and things like that. And as you mentioned, look at the history of this place and the the real importance of this. I'll bet people like me would say, I had no idea. Wow. So
yeah, no, I think it's really important. We do a lot of work with the Port of Seattle, and there's kind of some of the changes that are going on with the coordinated effort between the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma. But for me, what I think is a really interesting story is just the importance of the maritime trade and sector to this region.
Oh yeah.
When you've got a population that is growing increasingly faster every year, and there's kind of a lack of knowledge of how not only just the heritage of the region rooted in a maritime trade, but also the importance of it today. I think sometimes we all, even myself, we take for granted when we have the beautiful, Puget Sound right outside of us, looking out over the water, and including Washington, the Ship Canal, and the Chittenden locks, and all that history. They're all there. It's kind of a tourist attraction now, the locks, but it's a commercial venture with a commerce purpose, and it's all rooted in moving goods by water. Mm-hmm. And that's how this region became, really formed the foundation of what it's become, and how it's reinvented itself so many times. I mean, I'm always shocked by the city, being maritime, had a maritime emphasis in the early days, and then it was timber and natural resources, and then it was the aeronautical and the aerospace, and now we were a tech company for a while in medicine, and I've always found the city to be pretty resilient in reinventing itself. It's not a Detroit. It's reinvented itself 2 or 3 times. I find that pretty interesting. And for us, and for me, selfishly, being part of the maritime industry and still being able to be a contributing member towards the vibrancy of this city is a neat opportunity for us and for people in our trade.
Yeah, and I think that is such a key thing, because look around the country. How many places do this kind of thing? To reinvent and adapt and still be able to maintain something. So even though, now it's all tech and computer stuff, this industry, if you don't have this industry, this place is really going to suffer.
I mean, you look back at the history when they had the signs of whoever's the last one out of town, turn the lights off. The importance of all the different commercial sectors of this city, and the maritime is one of them. And I think to the conversation we're having downstairs, there are major operators and significant contributors on the maritime side that have, I imagine they must have University of Washington roots.
Sure.
Just because of the proximity. You've
Yeah.
got Foss Maritime is a large tug and barge company that resides from here. Crowley Maritime right here at Pier 17. Tote. You have the construction companies, Manson Construction, General Construction, who was right behind us. Now they're owned by Kiewit, but there's and then if you really get into specific trades, what we always find to be really interesting is just the development of the Pacific Northwest diving trade. Things were done a little bit different out here on the West Coast as the commercial diving industry developed, and so there's a lot of interesting stories, a lot of interesting heritage, a lot of interesting stories, and then a lot of interesting contributions that the maritime companies around here make to the greater good, not just to the region, but setting standards, both nationally and internationally.
Sure. Yeah. And isn't Ted Fick, is that his name? The head of the
the commissioner, the board commissioner?
Yeah. UW grad.
I believe he is as well, yeah, that's right. Which is great, and he doesn't, and it's interesting, he doesn't necessarily come from a nautical or from maritime
That's
background.
right, yeah.
But again, it's I think, there's two ways to look at that. There's the, when everyone thinks of the port, they think of two things.
Right.
They think of what's going on the waterfront, and then they think of the airport.
Yeah.
And he comes from a logistics
Logistics,
background,
yeah.
which I think is really helpful, because that's one of the big issues that our industry faces. Is it's not about moving goods on the water; it's about getting them to their intended endpoint quickly, and usually that is involved in getting to the airport or getting to inland locations.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of connections. I still find that number interesting. 70% stay in the region.
Yeah. So like I said, I think it's 70% stay in the state, and then 70% of those are in Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties.
That's amazing.
So like I said, it's got a flavor unlike just about any other.
I find that to be a shocking statistic, actually, but it makes sense. I think when people live in the Northwest, and if you grow up in the Northwest, you have a tendency to. I briefly lived in the Caribbean, and it was a wonderful holiday. It just was about 2 or 3 months too long. I lived there for almost a year, and I couldn't wait to get back. And I think it's because, again, it has a lot to do with the water.
Yeah.
All the outdoor activities and being close to the mountains, being able to ski, and I think there's a real affinity towards the region, and I think there's a real affinity towards the University of Washington.
Oh yeah.
And it's neat to see it grow in stature over the years, and really be a hotbed for medicine and information systems, and I was a political science major, so I was a liberal arts major, so I loved it because I just loved being at the big campus, and I thought we had great teachers. But it's neat to see it gain in national recognition, and to be a part of that is I think is a neat piece for alumni.
Yeah, and I just have always had a feeling, because for a long time a lot of the administrations at the university think, gee, how come nationwide people may not think of the UW immediately? They may think of UCLA, University of Michigan, all this, and I say it's geography. You take this university, plop it, Chicago, LA, somewhere else, that's cure. Because I think a lot of people think we're in Alaska.
It's way up there. There's already we of course painfully argue about the West Coast bias, but whether it's in national rankings for football or whatever, but
absolutely.
But I think you're right. The campus is amazing.
Yeah.
If you look and just I'm not if I didn't major in political science, I would have majored in history. That would have been my desire.
Mm-hmm.
And I always planned on doing that, but it just didn't take. But the Yukon Pacific Exposition and what that meant to the campus and the location of where it's at. It's a beautiful campus. It's a beautiful setting, and I think it's kind of like a little secret up here in the corner of the country that people. They hear about it. It's nationally ranked. They know they have some interesting, programs. But I think we're pretty fortunate.
Oh yeah. And looking at some of the specific rankings, you break it down, and I'm thinking, for a while, I know in the medical school field, when they come out with rankings, they come out with two fields. How do they compare in primary care? Then how do they compare in research? And research is really the big one.
Yep.
And so the UW's dominated the primary care. They're always number one. And they're usually in the top 10 in
Yeah.
research, meaning they're above 70% of the Ivy League schools.
Yeah.
They're above Stanford. And thinking, so this place that's out in the middle of, Alaska
Yeah.
has higher joint rankings than anybody else. That's
That's
amazing.
impressive. Yeah.
And the Nobel Prize and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
No, it's an amazing school. It's stood the test of time.
Yeah, exactly. So how did somebody in the political science field and, political science and history bend end up getting involved in this kind of thing?
Well, for me, it was, there's a lot of nepotism involved.
Uh-huh.
But again, because of the maritime roots in the Pacific Northwest region, specifically, where we're at,
Yeah.
my whole family grew up in the maritime trade. So my dad was a tankerman for Crowley. That had a heavy influence
Sure.
on my desire to want to, learn more about the maritime industry.
Uh-huh.
Even growing up as a kid in the 80s, it still was kind of, I had friends who had, families who had regular jobs.
Yeah.
And my dad was, traveling a lot and gone,
bet,
worked
yeah.
odd hours. My grandfather was owned a marine diesel mechanic shop in Ballard. One of my uncles and my aunts worked for him. My other two uncles, I come from a large Irish Catholic family, so there's a whole pile of,
Yeah.
Bloodlines everywhere. But everybody and my dad and his siblings worked in the maritime trade. And so for me, it just seemed like a natural kind of progression. I went to school. I was a liberal arts major.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't do well with numbers. That was not my skill. It's not one of my stronger suits, at the time at least. And the liberal arts major gave me an opportunity to kind of be a little more flexible.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a chance to go do a term down in Olympia with the state senator. I spent
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I went.
Uh-huh.
I was an intern basically for Senator Gary Nelson out of Edmonds.
Uh-huh.
That was a great experience just to kind of see the political process and take a quarter off but get credit for it. I wrote had a couple of independent research projects or
Mm-hmm.
classes that I took, and then I also did a thesis on what at the time was fairly new, was the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, which was,
Mm-hmm.
came into effect after the Exxon Valdez
Mhm.
incident up in Alaska in 1989. So for me, I just thought and so when I graduated, I thought, God, the best thing, the coolest thing that I could ever do would be go clean up oil spills and go work
Mhm.
on salvage projects, which is a falsehood. It's miserable working on oil spill projects because it's like Groundhog's Day,
Oh,
except
yeah.
for 9 months in a row.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to just kind of get into the business. A lot of my friends went to law school.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my friends were at that time graduating from the business school at UW, and were working at these new companies like Amazon and Arthur Andersen and
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft. And
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do something a little different. So my dad knew one of the owners at Global. They had worked together at Crowley. That's where the initial owners from Global came from. They worked at Crowley Maritime, and I think my first job was in October 2nd or 3rd of 1995, right after I graduated.
Oh, right after, yeah.
Yeah, right after, and it was working in the field, and I, in essence, fell in love with it. I was running around in the middle of the night on a boat, right off the Elliott Bay, and it just was really, really. I think it was something special. I never, I wasn't a guy who was, I was not a guy who was mechanically inclined. I wasn't somebody who had, who spent a lot of time on the water, running sailboats or anything like that when I was growing up. But there was a real affinity and connection for me. And I just and it just kind of, I kept working here when all my friends were talking about stock options and leapfrogging from job to job. I had the opportunity just to kind of learn a lot about working on the water. And that's how it started, and that was in 1995, and it's a long time later and I'm still here, so and I think that's my story is not any less or any more unique than anyone else who's in the maritime trade, and probably working at Global. You either love it, or you very quickly learn that the demands on your personal time and the fact that the schedule's not set, and that it's very dynamic, if you don't really enjoy that, and if that doesn't move the needle for you or get your adrenaline going, then this is an industry that'll eat you up, because it's not built for 9 to 5.
Yeah.
It's not built for holidays or birthday parties. You know, to some level, it's challenging for families,
I bet. Yeah.
but that's part of the draw. I think
Sure.
it's a really unique field, and it's rooted in blue collar craft and professional pride in your trade, and it's just kind of a neat. I just think it's an underappreciated sector of our of business, and there's a lot of ties to it.
Yeah.
You know? And there's a lot of family. There's a lot of family ties that go back. You know, it's not. There's just, you know, people have ties to the region or ties to the trade itself. Their parents were involved or siblings, and there's a lot of connectivity. So it's a pretty small group, and you know, and there's not a lot of places to go. So
Yeah.
you know, we have a tendency to recycle a lot of people in our industry. If they're not working for this company, then they go work for that company.
Uh-huh.
And it's small enough where everybody knows everybody by their first name. So, but that's how I got into it. I just, you know, the more likely story is I was when I graduated, I needed a job, and
Yeah.
you know, I think I was making $10.40 an hour when I started Global, and that was amazing.
Oh yeah.
I just thought that was great, and it was full-time work, and they told me, you know, don't quit your other job. This is just, you know, this is gonna show up every day at 7, and if we have work, we'll put you to work. If we don't, we'll send you home, and then just come back the next day. And that was very much, you know, our company at the time. I mean, it was on Harbor Island at the time.
Sure.
So it was before the modernization project, and it turned into a container port. So we were on